Hi guys. So I believe that to understand the contemporary politics and to understand the history as well as to have a better view of the world, it is important to understand certain ideologies. So in this video, I will be covering those ideologies with my focus predominantly on capitalism, socialism, communism, and fascism. So let's start with capitalism because capitalism is the first ideology which came in the scheme of things. So, what exactly is capitalism? Now, capitalism believes in the principle of private ownership of means of production, and it also believes in free market system. So, obviously, when there would be private ownership and when there would be free market, which would be based on the concept of supply and demand, it would also give rise to profit driven economy, and there would be more competitiveness in the economy. So, to understand capitalism in a much better manner, we have to first look at its origin. So, we see origin of capitalism in the end of serfdom and feudal lord system in England. So, what used to happen during the feudal lord system was that there used to be one feudal lord who would own large area of land, and there would be people working for that feudal lord, and they would just be given bare minimum, for example accommodation and food. They would not be paid laborers. So and any surplus which was there in this feudal lord system would go to the feudal lord. It wouldn't be sold in the market or it wouldn't be traded. So what happened now, when there were revolts and when this feudal lord system ended, capitalism came. Now any surplus would be traded and it would be sent to the markets, so thus giving rise to market economy. And then there were paid laborers in capitalism, and then there was more innovation due to competition. So this is the initial stages of capitalism. After this, during 18th and 19th century, industrial revolution came. Now this gave rise to industrial capitalism. Now because of industrial capitalism, there was even more stratification in society. Now there were two classes. There was a capitalist class and there was this workers class. The capitalist class was the owner class and the worker class was the labor class. So you can imagine that there was no concept of a worker class getting to a position where he would once become a part of the owner class. And we can even see it in today's contemporary world, where a worker who works for Apple may never get an opportunity to even own a Apple product himself. So now this capitalism although gave rise to competition, and it although gave rise to innovation, but there were a lot of negative consequences as well. For example, the first thing was poor health conditions. Now there were a lot of people living in urban centers, and there were even like as much as 8 or 9 people living under same roof, living under one flat in cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg. So obviously there were poor health conditions. Secondly, there was even greater income inequality. The rich were getting richer and the poor were where they have always been. And then there was problems like child labor, hunger, population increase, rapid urbanization, pollution increase, and more importantly, this capitalism also gave rise to the consumer driven society. Now what is consumer driven society? It is exactly what we see in our today's world, where if you go to a mall and you would see that there would be a lot of different brands, there would be a lot of different things placed in one under the one roof, and there would even be things which you do not need, but you would still feel compelled, you would still feel tempted to buy those things. So this is what consumerism is, and this is what a consumer driven society is. So now, moving on, when we talk about capitalism, we cannot talk about this ideology without mentioning people like Adam Smith or people like John Maynard Keynes. So, who was Adam Smith? So now Adam Smith wrote this book, The Wealth of Nations, and in this book he gave the concept of supply and demand. Now, supply and demand, according to Adam Smith, are the invisible hands of economy which regulate the market. Now, the second person important here is John Maynard Keynes. So now, John Maynard Keynes, he gave the idea of a little bit of state intervention as well. He said that states should make fiscal and monetary policies to regulate economy. Also, Keynes is the most important person or the most influential person behind the concept of Bretton Woods system, and which is currently working as IMF and World Bank or World Trade Organization. So now, this was what you need to know about capitalism. Obviously, I cannot tell you everything because capitalism in itself is a very broad concept. So this is the basic of capitalism. Now, the next system that came as a result of capitalism, or you can say as a critique of capitalism, was socialism. Now, what happened was the thinkers, they started talking about of an ideal society. They started talking about a state of utopia where there would be welfare for people. So now, socialism also is a very broad ideology, but a easy definition to understand socialism would be that the population collectively owns and controls the means of production, and the results of those production are equally distributed, or you can say are proportionally distributed among the people. So now socialism is also the basis of welfare. Now, for example, uh, and where do you see this welfare working? Mostly in the Nordic countries, where there are same opportunities for different classes, where there's free education system, where there's free health system or medical system. So now this is what socialism was. Now, from this socialist thought, another ism originated, or another thought or ideology originated, which was communism. Now, communism is a very different concept, as communism dealt with a classless or divisionless society. Now, in the idea of communism was very radical thought. It said that there should be no state or there should be no government. There should be that people are the most important element of the society, and there should be no concept of ownership at all. There should be no money based economy. So now, who was the main proponent of capitalism? When we of communism, when we talk about communism, we have to keep in mind Karl Marx, because communism is the implementation of Marxist ideas. Now, Karl Marx wrote two big books, which were Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. Now, Marx talks about two classes. One is your proletariat class, which is your worker class, which is your poor class, and the second one is your bourgeoisie class, which is the capitalist class, or which is the class which was exploiting the proletariat. So, according to Karl Marx and according to Marxism, it said that there would be a class conflict and there would be a class struggle, after which there would be a revolution, and then that revolution would lead to what? It would lead to socialism and eventually communism. We will also see the difference between socialism and communism, so don't worry about that. However, Marxism however Marxism or communism, it did not define that how the communist society would be governed. So after communism, what we see is Leninism. Now, Leninism is the practical implementation of Marxist ideas. Now, what does Leninism do? So, Leninism is basically the ideas of Marx, where and how Lenin and Stalin changed them according to their own understanding and according to how they wanted to see USSR develop. So in 1917 there came Bolshevik revolution, and the person responsible for this Bolshevik revolution, the person who led this Bolshevik revolution, was Lenin. So now what Lenin gave the idea, so now the idea that Lenin gave was the idea of dictatorship of proletariats. He believed that there should be a dictatorship, there should be no democracy, there should be a dictatorship which would overlook the redistribution of resources. He got a lot of ideas from Marxism, but it differed on a lot of different things from Marxism. For example, Leninism propagated the idea of vanguard party to establish communist state via socialism. So now, here you have to take a break, and here you have to understand that what are vanguard parties. Now, vanguard parties are those parties which were in the form of different Soviets, which were in the form of different working class parties, and their main aim would be to protect the ownership of people. So what they would do is they would take the money from bourgeoisie class and distribute it to the proletariat class. Now, how is socialism different, or how is Leninism different from communism? Now, communism believes that there is no space for any sort of government. It believes that there is no space for any sort of even political parties. But Leninism said that there would be dictatorship of proletariat, which means that there would be one single party which would lead the entire process of this redistribution of resources. Whereas in socialism there can even be more than one parties. So now Leninism was not a very utopian concept. It was a very practical concept, and it was implemented in USSR, sorry, and it was it and for like 70 to 60 years, it even gave very positive results. However, Leninism could not survive because of evident problems with this system. Another thing that Leninism believed in was nationalization. So now, what is nationalization? Nationalization is when there's state ownership of property. However, in socialism, what was there? There was people ownership, and in communism, there was no sort of ownership. So we can say that nationalism was even labeled by the USA or by the West as state capitalism, as USA believed that these industries that Lenin is developing, they are also the ones which are not directly owned by the people. So the whole idea of Marxism behind this Leninism, that people would be the most important element of the society, is not followed here. So USA claimed that this nationalism or this Leninism was in turn nothing different than capitalism, and it was state capitalism now. So now the important part here is to understand that how each of these, communism and socialism and nationalism, are linked. So now what we see is that communism is a part of socialism. So to say that, what I want to mean here is that every socialist is not a communist, but every communist is a socialist. Because as we studied, what was communism? Communism wanted to have no government, no money based economy, and the means to that was socialism. So communism has to go through the process of socialism. Now, another important thing here that we need to understand is the difference between neo Marxism and Marxism. So the thing is that in neo Marxism, capitalism is criticized, and it is it isn't seen as a progressive approach. It is seen as a regressive thing. However, when we talk about pure Marxism, so Marx described capitalist propagation as a progressive rather than a regressive movement. To understand that in easier terms would be that Marx believed that there would be capitalism, because of which there would be an uprising, due to which would come communism in the society. But neo Marxism, it relied solely on the negative and exploitative aspects of the society, or of the system of the capitalist system. So now, here, after understanding socialism, capitalism, and communism, we also have to look at the types of socialism. So now, socialism, as I told you earlier, is a very broad term. It cannot be restricted to just this very specific idea that I've given you. So let us look at the two types of socialism. Now, one type of socialism is orthodox Marxism, which is what? Which is Leninism, that was followed in USSR, or which was Marxist Leninism, which was the idea of which was given by Stalin and was followed in obviously USSR and then later in Cuba as well, and Maoism, which was followed in China, Laos, or Vietnam. So now here let's just clear our understanding that what is Maoism. Now Maoism was, as you see, it was very close to what this idea of communism is, but Maoism was different in a way that in Leninism, which was also a part of communism, was that there were people who were working in industries, and the revolution would come through a workers class. However, in China there were not a lot of industries, and it was mostly a farmer society or an agrarian society. So there, this revolution, this people's revolution, came through what? It came through the farmers. It came through the efforts of the revolts of the peasants. Okay, so that is an important thing to understand. That is a little bit distinction between Maoism or Leninism. Now, the first type, as we discussed, is the orthodox Marxism, which were the ideas of Marx implemented by Lenin or Mao Zedong or people like Stalin. And the second one is social democracy. Now, social democracy, how is that part of socialism? Because it inculcates capitalism plus socialism. So now here you see once again the example of Nordic region, where you see that the economy is highly capitalist. However, there is social welfare system as well. There's free education, there's free healthcare. There are such restrictions and such limitations on trade which are not going in the advantage of the people, or which are harming the health of the people. So those are the things which also makes it an important follower of the socialism. Now, As we have discussed, what we have discussed capitalism, we have discussed socialism, and we have discussed communism. So now we will be looking at the problems which were there with communism or with Leninism. So now communism or Leninism, it did work pretty well initially, and there was an economic uplift in the in the USSR. However, in the later years, it could not give the desired results. Now, why? Because of the obvious reasons. What obvious reasons? Firstly, it isn't this idea of communism or the idea of Leninism is in itself not sustainable, because there's no incentive for the workers to work hard. Now, everything you see, every industry is governed by the state, or is more appropriate, or it would be more appropriate to say is owned by the state. So people did not have any incentive to work hard. They were just working as if they were forced to work. And then the other thing, communism or Leninism, it did not have a lot of room for innovation. It did not have a lot of room for creativity. And as we see today, there are only 5 countries which claim themselves to be which claim themselves to be communist countries. Which are those countries? There is China, there is North Korea, there is Vietnam, there is Laos, and there is Cuba. And even in 4 out of these 5 countries, which means that excluding North Korea, the other 4 are still not following communism in its true spirit, or we can say that their economy has opened relatively as compared to the last years when communism came there. So now, after all this discussion, or after all this comparison between different forms of ideologies, we can reach to a conclusion that these 3 ideologies are, they have very blurred boundaries. No country is purely socialist or communist or capitalist. As we see in our current world, we see USA, which is a capitalist society. However, still it has some sort of socialism in it. When we talk about the social security programs of USA, USSR, which was developed in on the idea of communism, it also had huge development of industry, and which was part of capitalism. How? It was creating capital. It was capital generation. It was a way of capital generation, these industries. And then if we look at the modern day Russia, which by the way calls itself as a democratic federal republic under its constitution, we can still see some reminiscence of communism there. So you can see how all these different isms, or how all these different ideologies are interlinked, or how they are followed simultaneously in different countries in contemporary times. Another example could be of China. Now, China, it calls itself as a communist country. However, when we look at China and its trade pattern, we see that pretty much the Chinese economy is also based on the principles of free market, when we talk about the specialized economic zones in China. And then finally, we'll be moving towards what? Our last ism, or our last ideology, which is fascism. Now, why I have kept fascism at the very end is because it is an ideology which is completely different from the other 3 ideologies. Although it buys few ideas from socialism and capitalism, however, it is very, very different in its very essence, that how it treated the people, or how it believed that the world politics or world economics could work. Now, in our contemporary times, when we talk about the word fascism, or when we associate this word with a person, or with a group of people, or with a political party, or with a country, we believe it, if we take it in a very negative manner, that he's a fascist, which means what? He's very pro of violence, or he's very prone to radical ideas. However, when we talk about fascism during the time, or when it came as an ideology, as it came as a working ideology, it came in 3 countries, or in 3 empires generally. Number one, it was Germany. Hitler run Germany. Number two, it was Mussolini run Italy. And number three, it was in the kingdom of Japan as well. So now, what exactly this fascism believes? Now, fascism was what? It was against the rational of egalitarian democracy. It believed that this egalitarian democracy, it leads to crisis. So now what? It was against what? It was against democracy. It was against the rule of people. So now, as socialism believed in the rule of people, it believed in the ownership of the people. So now, fascism was against that ideology. Second thing, it believed in what? It believed in one party dictatorship. It believed in one party dictatorship, which is also called totalitarianism. Moreover, it believed in cultural purity. Now, when we talk about cultural purity, it is a very interesting yet a very sad concept when we look at the history. It believed that there was cultural superiority. Now, these Nazis and these people in Italy, they believed that their race was better than all other races, and they believed that every other minority living within their boundaries was a problem for them, and they believed in risorgimento or integral nationalism. Now, this kind of nationalism is one where you want to eliminate all the minorities, so you have one pure race, you have one group, one race which is superior. And what did Hitler believe in? He believed in this Aryan race. And what else does this fascism believe in? It believes in cultural Darwinism. Now, what is Darwinism? It is survival of the fittest. So it believes that only who is fit enough to live in our society should be a part of society, and all other people must be eliminated. It also believed in widespread or rampant kind of violence to remove the weak people. And as in Germany, Hitler believed that Jews were the problem, Jews were the weak people. So during that time in Holocaust, in Germany and from other parts where German control was, Hitler tried to remove this uh, inferior class according to him. So this is what fascism believes in. Also, another very important thing that we must understand about fascism is that the economic system that fascism followed. Now, the economic system of fascism was also very interesting. It was against Marxism, but it was also against capitalism. Now, it is a contradiction in itself. By meaning that it was against Marxism, what are we saying? That it's saying that there should be that Marxism believed in equality for people. However, fascism is not equality for people. But at the same time, it is also against capitalism. Now, what was capitalism? Capitalism was where everything was owned by the people. However, this fascism was also against capitalism. It believed that the ownership must be of state, which was also the concept of communism, but once again, it is also different from communism or socialism. Now, at the same time, fascism was against unions, because unions give rise to violence, or unions give rise to revolutions. So, fascism was against unions as well. At the same time, in fascism, one of the countries which was a proponent of it, Italy, it was even against trade. It believed in complete self-reliance. It said that there's no need for trade. There's not even need for trade. There's only need for self-reliance. And lastly, under the economic policy of fascism, it did allow some private enterprise, but unlike capitalism, where the private enterprises are to earn profit, here the private enterprises were only for the welfare of people. The things which could help the people were only, the industries which were needed by the people were only promoted. So you can see that how industries were also controlled by the fascist regime, and only those industries were allowed for, and one of the major example of that could be Volkswagen. Now, when Hitler was provided with the idea of Volkswagen, he was very happy with it, because he believed, as the name itself suggests, Volkswagen, a wagon for the people, a car of the people, which would help promote the idea of Hitler, which would help promote this Aryan race that Hitler believed existed in Germany. So these were the different isms, or the different ideologies, or the different theories that run our political system, that run our contemporary politics in the international arena. So I hope that you guys have a better understanding of it. To give a quick recap, what were all these things? First was capitalism, which was private ownership. Then came socialism, which was private ownership, but which was also for the welfare of the people. Then third was communism, which believed that there must be no idea of ownership at all. There is no concept such as money. There is no concept such as ownership. Then what came? Leninism. Now, Leninism believed in dictatorship of the proletariat. It believed that there must be one dictator who would redistribute the resources to make sure that there's a transition from capitalist society to a communist society while passing through the socialist society. And lastly, there was fascism, which was a very radical approach, and which believed in purity of purity of one specific race, or which believed in ideas and radical ideas such as eliminating everyone who they consider to be weak. So these are all the different isms, and I hope now you would understand them in a better manner. To get a clear understanding of them, read them from somewhere else as well. But this should be enough to give you a basic idea about these different ideologies. Thank you.